各位，经济学家提出了一个看似简单却让所有人都沉默的问题：我们能否在稀土领域彻底摆脱中国呢？印度的确拥有全球第4大稀土的储量，看起来这意味着潜在的独立。但真正的问题是，谁能把这一些矿石变成战略资产呢？开采只是第一步，从分离、提炼到合金、磁材，再到新能源与国防系统的实际应用，这一条价值链几乎全部被中国掌控。中国用了30年建立起覆盖全球的稀土体系，从包头、江西到南方沿海，每一个环节都形成规模化的协作。印度想要追赶，却发现根本不是技术短板，而是系统的短板。在中国，这一个系统的背后是科研院所、国企投资与地方政府政策的长线合作；而在印度，矿业依然分散，设计老旧，环保门槛高企，审批体系缓慢。当中国的稀土企业在思考磁材的能量密度的时候，印度的企业还在等待一份新的环保许可。更令人讽刺的是，印度虽然出口稀土原矿，却必须花更多的价格从中国进口成品。这是典型的原料依赖型结构，就像是他在卖树皮，却又要买家具。而这一切导致印度的新能源、电动汽车和国防产业都在根部被中国供应链锁住。有专家直言，中国的稀土优势不只是产量的垄断，而是一种结构性的控制力。它不是靠贸易壁垒，而是靠产业逻辑的锁定。上游掌握的资源，中游控制技术，下游整合市场。任何国家想切断这一体系，都要付出巨大的代价。技术、资金、时间，一个都不能少。于是，讨论的气氛逐渐转为无奈。有学者提出，要学习澳大利亚或者日本的稀土项目模式，与西方合作建立替代供应链。但另外一位专家摇头说，那需要政治共识，而我们还在争论谁该主导这一件事。这一句话引发了全场的叹息，因为他们都知道，真正的障碍并不在中国，而是在印度自己。一位来自德里的地缘政治专家总结道，我们不是被中国控制，而是被全球化的现实控制。这一句话让全场陷入更深的沉默。其实这不仅是印度的困境，也是所有试图去中国化的国家正在面对的真相。在全球产业网络中，中国已经从世界的工厂变成了世界的节点。从稀土、太阳能、电池到 AI 芯片，任何的环节都绕不开这一个节点。脱钩意味着重构，而重构意味着巨大的代价和长期的不稳定性。所以真正的问题并不是能不能摆脱中国，而是有没有在无法摆脱的情况下，到底如何才能更聪明、更务实的与中国共存呢？这才是21世纪所有新兴国家共同要回答的难题。让我们看一下视频。
Mr. Gupta, in terms of this stranglehold that China seems to have, what is your assessment? How has that strategy played out, where India, though it has the 5th largest reserve of rare earths, we are still counting on imports from China at this stage, and only now we seem to have a policy in place to secure our reserves?
There are two things which need to be borne in mind in the context of rare earths. That rare earths aren't all that rare. In fact, there are abundant reserves of rare earth in the crust of the earth, and that is available everywhere. The other point that needs to be mentioned is that there are two kinds of rare earths, the heavy ones and the light ones. And just for by way of an example, the heavy rare earth, there is one mine in California in the US. That is the only mine in the US. And the US does not have the technology to extract that rare earth, to process that rare earth. So it extracts the rare earth and sends it to China for processing. So even though you mentioned that 70% of the rare earth is in China, more than 90% of the rare earth that is processed in the world is done by China. So either the rare earth is not of a kind which can be processed quite easily, And the countries which have the rare earth may not have the technology to do it. And the added point is that it may take time and a huge amount of investments to process the rare earth, even if a country possesses it. As you said, India has the fifth largest reserve of rare earth. But it may take, between 5 to 10 years, even if we start to do it right away, to process rare earths in a good enough form that it can be used in various industries.
So this technology,
Yes.
that we're talking about in processing rare earths, now that is seems to be rare from what Mr. Dasgupta is pointing out. Rishabh Jain, do weigh in on this, because India has announced this new critical minerals policy. There is a plan for a national stockpile. Tell me if you think that's enough to counter China's stranglehold at this stage, or do you think we still are scratching the surface, as it were, when it comes to building real processing capacity?
Thank you. I'll build on what Mr. Gupta said. We have, of course, one of the largest reserves of light rare earth in India. And at this particular moment, what we are doing is converting some of those that are found in monazite sand to rare earth oxides. And this we have been doing for decades. So using these rare earth oxides, we can potentially produce magnets, but of course, we do not necessarily have the technology. I would also want to point out that rare earths that are found across the world are found in different concentrations. The concentration that is found in India is very, very low, which is 0.04 to 0.06%, whereas those that are found in countries like China and US are 4 to 6%. So this is 100 times better, or maybe of higher grade that is available. So it makes it easier for them to process it and recover. Whereas in India, given the low purity and the low concentration that exists, it takes us a lot of time and a lot of steps to do it. So of course, that is one of the key reasons why our cost is also very high. But India already has the technology to process rare earth to rare earth oxide, which itself is rare. And IREL has this capability now. But the challenge is that where do we get even high purity rare earth from? Because most of these, if is available in China, is also processed in China. How do we get maybe the better rare earth to be processed in India? But then the next question also is, what do we do with that rare earth? Because at the end of the day, we need to make magnets. Most of the rare earths are used to make magnets, but extracting metals from rare earth oxide is one of the most difficult tasks. And at this particular moment, it is China that has the technology and is also, of course, making the magnets. And that is where there's a huge concentration. So with the National Critical Minerals Mission, there has been a lot of focus on processing. And after the recent, the ban that took place a couple of months ago, India has also started to think about how do we develop magnetic manufacturing capability. And based on our understanding, some academic institutions and some CSIR labs and some industry, very, very few have already demonstrated their capability to even make magnets. But as Mr. Gupta said, whenever we start, it will take us 5 to 7 or even 10 years to develop it. So better start now than later.
Better start now than later. Making magnets, it's where it's at. Just having reserves, those may be the fifth largest, it doesn't suffice. And like Mr. Dasgupta also pointed out, that even China, in terms of processing, there is this high-end technology that is required. So we have very little refining capability at this stage. That's a given. Considering these views coming in, Professor Ashok, how much of a challenge do you see this as? What do you think needs to change in our industrial policy to hasten the process, as it were, for our capabilities to rise?
Yes. Yeah, we have very small content of this rare earth. That's correct. Though it is fifth position, but it's very small content. But as a percentage, it's very small, and we have time to develop the technology to extract more. We have technology, but it's very costly. So now we started, and government is very serious and about this. It's so-called our mission, so Atmanirbhar Bharat. It is also very important and crucial for the time to start, and government has already started and very serious and sincere. So we should hope that in future,
Know-how, Doctor.
in 5 years or 10 years, we will get.
Professor, do we have the know-how for this? It's very important to have the intent, but now the question is, do we have the know-how, have what it takes so that we can hit the ground running? We already seem to be late on this count.
Yeah, correct. So China not only restricted their export, they also restrict the technology to use. So we have to develop, in some extent we have, and we are doing well. So it is not impossible. We have to work hard. But
how hard does industry have to work? Hormuz from the auto and EV industries. Let me just take that to Hormuz for a moment, Professor. Just want to understand from an industry standpoint, because if we don't move fast enough, our manufacturing is going to get affected. The auto industry, EV industry is still at a nascent stage, and we need these rare earths, and we need them in a form that the EV industry can grow leaps and bounds. But Hormuz, how exposed are Indian manufacturers today if China were to suddenly restrict exports of rare earth magnets or batteries? How affected would we be? Because that still is the big risk right now for Indian manufacturing, Indian industry, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and as we go into electrification, where we need magnets, more efficient, more powerful magnets, which are made out of rare earths, I think we stand to be even more vulnerable. But it's not just EVs, even normal cars where you might have some small electric motors, you do need rare earth magnets for that. Because clearly, I think rare earth magnets, it's, just by nature, they can be, let's say they can be more compact, they can be more efficient than, let's say, ferrite magnets, which, others are trying to make as a substitute, but it's just not good enough. And, honestly, like you said, I think, it's a big challenge because, it's not just finding rare earths, it's the refining and separation, which is really complex. It's even environmentally hazardous and hugely capital intensive. It's like tens of billions of dollars to set up a plant. And, China's mastered this decades ago. They were subsidizing producers, tolerating pollution, while other countries just exited the space due to high costs and environmental constraints. So, they've got a stranglehold on this. And right now, we lack both the industrial ecosystem and technical know-how, for the downstream processing from oxide to metal to magnet. And really, I think for us to be vulnerable, our policy should be from mine to magnet. We need to control that whole supply chain, going forward, because I think rare earths could be the oil of the 21st century.
The oil of the 21st century, and that's how it's being touted. Jayant Dasgupta, you'd have to agree. But this point that Hormuz has made about Chinese dominance in rare earths, you pointed it out yourself. Of course, it took decades in the making. So do you see this as an economic advantage which they have worked on? Or do you think this is a deliberate strategic weapon that Beijing is probably using against its competitors? And that includes India, but also the rest of the world. So in terms of a strategy, how could we not see this coming if, like Hormuz is saying, this is the oil of the 21st century?
I think, if I'm not wrong, this was part of the 2025 vision of China, including, of course, electric batteries. Rare earths was also, if I'm not wrong, part of it. So China had foreseen this about 7-8 years ago, that the world would be hugely dependent on this. But their investments and their pursuit of technology, appropriate technology to convert the mineral to magnets, I think started even earlier. It may have started from the early 2000s. So China has proceeded in a very calculated manner. And of course, the fact that other countries which were capable of putting in so much of money and technology to develop a parallel system of exploitation did not move forward because they were quite complacent that China is already making it, we'll keep buying from China. But China has now decided that this is a strategic weapon which can be used, and it has used it against the US. It may very well, from what I had read in the papers, in April and May, there was some disruption of rare earth magnet exports, which had hit our car industry also at that point of time. So China can, I think, use it, can weaponize this item to get what it wants by way of negotiations, market access from the other side.
So, Mr. Dasgupta, this is not just like a, an economic kind of challenge. This is turning out to be a strategic challenge which challenges national security as well. Is that how you see it as well, Rishabh? from your opinion, from your standpoint, this is turning out to be much more than, economic leverage that China has. It's about national security and something that India has to be guarded against.
100% agree. I think while the magnet demand may be fairly low in terms of few hundred crores, the sector that it impacts is huge. It's in billions of dollars. The auto industry, the energy sector, the defense, electronics, of course, all of them are highly dependent on critical minerals and the components that are made from these critical minerals and rare earth. So at this particular moment, of course, where the global geopolitics is, some of these, either tariffs or export bans, import curtailments, etc., are being used by countries to get some leverage in the negotiations. At the end of the day, I think there are two aspects that we need to be take into account. That at this particular moment, we do not necessarily have the capability to manufacture magnets. So it will take us 5 years or 10 years to manufacture some of these magnets. So hence, for the next couple of years, and at this moment, we need to negotiate and figure out a way of working with China. Otherwise, it can impact our industry and our ecosystem and our economy itself. So that is in the short term. And I think in that particular way, the government has had decent success. But in the long term, we need to also ensure that if India has to move towards becoming a developing economy, we cannot be so much reliant on any third party, including China. And hence, building that capability will be very, very critical. The other benefit, of course, is that once we are able to make or manufacture such complex products in the country, it will also open up many new opportunities that will help our economy itself. So I think we have to know that what is realistic in the short term,
Yes.
and also keep our momentum going in the long term. Because even if the restrictions go away tomorrow, that should not mean that we again continue the same path of import reliance.
Hormaz, you'd have to agree. At this time when we don't have the capabilities, despite the fact that China has built it so robustly over a period of time, and strategically one might add, but then what do you do in the interim? What does an Indian EV sector do? What are these makers doing? Are they going to seriously diversify their supply chains? Can they even? Are they still heavily dependent on these Chinese imports for the key components, like the permanent magnets? How exactly will they tide this in case China decides to kind of have a stronger hold on how this technology goes, or how even the kind of stockpiles that we are trying to generate is shared with the rest of the world by China?
No, I think definitely this is a problem, and it's there are workarounds which you can have. Don't forget, I think Indians are also quite ingenious in finding that out. One option could be to send a part from here which needs a magnet to China and get it back here as a complete component. But that also China could effectively stop. Or you just buy a full built-up component, not broken down, which has the magnet in it, which again is a lot costlier. But at least production doesn't stop that way. Or there are parallel ways of getting these magnets out as well. So I think everyone's looking at their own ways of doing it, but it's not ideal. But I think bottom line is we have to develop our own parallel system for this. Our own long-term let's say supply chain, and for that it needs a real strong policy push. We need collaboration, to work with other countries. We need to invest in urban mining. Of course, we have to have environmental safeguards, and a longer term strategy, whether it's like a critical minerals board, like we're doing with semiconductors, to sort of coordinate exploration, investment, and R&D. Of course, R&D is the main thing. So yeah, I think right now we are really in a vulnerable position, but I think the short-term workarounds can be there. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of the panelists were saying we have to negotiate with China and make and kind of try and ensure that they lift this curb and this bottleneck, which is really impacting our production here, especially the EV side of things.
So, Mr. Das Gupta, taking off from what Hormaz is suggesting over here, how easy or difficult is it to negotiate with China for India at this point? Do you think we could form rare earth alliances with our Quad partners or even the African nations? Will that insulate us, at least in the interim, from any supply side shocks? Or you think that's going to just shift dependence from one supply to another? Because you can't be just working for the interim, Mr. Das Gupta, right?
The first thing one needs to bear in mind is that more than 90% of the rare earth magnets are being produced in China. So there is no point in having a collaborative arrangement with African nations or with even Japan and Australia for producing rare earth magnets at this stage. So that is, I don't think, on the cards. What is on the cards is to negotiate with China. And one of the things which I have come across recently is somebody who was close to the Chinese top leadership saying that India should join the RCEP. Now, that is a kind of suggestion which has been made, I think, in a very calculated manner, because RCEP is something which China had set its heart on for getting access to India through. And that was its main, because it has already got an FTA with Australia, with the ASEAN 10, and Japan, it has very close relations. So it was mainly India that it wanted to access through RCEP. And that is something which we may have to, dangle or may have to trade off against getting an assured supply of rare earth magnets from China. That is just a thought I'm leaving you with.
Now, Professor Ashok, when you talk about the possibility of India developing this capability when it comes to even refining rare earths, tell me what it's going to take, because there would be environmental clearances, you would have land issues over there as well. So you can't have a bureaucratic inertia at this stage when we are fighting with something that is so crucial for national security. Where do you think the possible hurdles are that India can tackle immediately to be able to take this on?
No, immediately we can't do any very big thing, but it takes time. But there is another history. If you see, till the 80s, the US was exploring and US was processing it. But because of that, it has very high intensity environmental concern. So it was shifted to China, and China has some different kind of political system. They can handle this environmental restriction. China, US and India have the vibrant democracy, so we have the more sensitive about the environmental hazards and so on. So there is one more problem. Not only it is capital intensive, our concern is about this environmental concern. So it is very difficult to process the environmental hazard and so many things are related to it. So other economy is very difficult. So there are two types: capital intensive, availability of technology, R&D, research and development, with the environmental concern.
Sure.
So it's not very it's very difficult to handle the environmental concern.
Right.
With the economy and so many things are there.
Hormaz, you'd have to agree, but tell me, in terms of the auto sector's wish list from the government right now, on securing rare earth supplies, what do you think it's subsidies? You did mention R&D. You think there are trade deals. What would the sector be hoping and wishing for? What do you think the sector's wish list for the government would be?
I think immediately to try and ensure that the curbs on the exports of rare earth magnets are lifted, just so that it can be business as usual.
Okay.
So I think that's what it needs to be. But I think, looking at a broader, let's say strategy, clearly, with China, it may not stop at rare earths. It could go into lithium or battery cells. Again, we are hugely dependent on China. I think I would say the majority of all EV manufacturers sourcing their cells from China, and even those planning to make it over here, the tech transfer, whether China gives that also is another issue. So, I think all these things are really a big worry. And so I think it's quite important that we kind of, negotiate, come to an understanding. Perhaps we may need to open up some investments for Chinese companies in India as a quid pro quo or a kind of part of the deal. So all this will have to be considered. But I think, it's just these kind of what we see as just commodities. Three things, let's say rare earths, lithium cells, and even chips, semiconductor chips. Now, thankfully, China, it's more Taiwan and other countries which supply that. So they are not part of that. But these are really core, let's say critical technologies which run everything today. So I think that we really need to make sure that we're not vulnerable and we secure our, let's say, supply chain security by making sure that this is not disrupted in going forward.
What's your understanding of our vulnerability right now and to be able to address it almost immediately in terms of the policy that the government is creating, in terms of the stockpiles that it's trying to put together, and being able to negotiate with China when it comes to diplomacy and all of that considered? What do you think? Where do we stand right now and what needs to be done immediately?
As I'd also earlier mentioned, so we should continue to negotiate. I think we've had some successful meetings between the leaderships of the both countries, so that is good, good step forward. But at the end of the day, I think what is also important is that if we have to develop this capability in India, maybe in the long term itself, what are the important changes that are required? I would say there are two aspects. One is the cost and the other is the technology. Most of the countries stopped focusing on developing solar, battery, rare earth, magnet technology is because they were unable to compete with cost, and maybe a supplier in China or companies in China were able to provide at a lower rate. Now, over a period of time, what happened that many of these companies that may have had the technology basically vanished and they do not necessarily exist right now. So if India has to tomorrow develop a technology, we need to figure out that how do we absorb that delta that a domestic company which is starting at a nascent stage very early without economies of scale, there will always be maybe 30, 40, 50% delta or maybe sometimes even 100% delta. How do we absorb that? And I think in some cases, because in the overall cost, the magnet or the rare earth cost will be fairly small, it will be easier to absorb. And same, we need to also within the procurement systems for our corporates within the government, we need to maybe start rethinking that the L1, the lowest bid mechanism, is that always the best case? Because then you would anyways go to a supplier that may be importing and then supplying it to you instead of maybe manufacturing domestically. And same for consumers. Are we as Indians ready to pay slightly higher price for building domestic capability? So I think end to end, we need an ecosystem change, approach change, mindset change if we have to really develop it. And this needs to also be communicated to everyone that what is their role in ensuring that all of these technologies, very important for the economy, also is developed in India.